May all beings be happy. May all beings be healthy. May all beings be free from harm. May all beings love life. May all beings awaken. Welcome to another Kook Audio podcast. I'm DC Poobah of Kook Audio and Kook Archives, preserving the legacy of Shunryu Suzuki and those whose paths cross his, and anything else that comes to mind. I pray that you and yours are safe and comfortable, free from economic hardship, and able to get out and do whatever it is you want within the limitations of the universal precept of do as little harm as possible. So today we have the second consecutive podcast with guest Barry Crawford, and that's Berry Crawford. And I have a friend named Barry in Fort Worth. And I looked up, you can look up how common a name is. Barry is, I think, 4 times more common than Berry. I think those are the only 2 Berry Barrys that I can remember knowing. So that's significant, right? Anyway, last week we talked about Barry's Zen path and his life and that sort of thing. And this week we're going to talk about his delving into the science of Zen. And appropriately, he has a website called, getting a little closer to it here, scienceofzen.org. Just wanted to make sure. And we touch on, there's another one, and we start off with it a little bit. The Sierra Foothills Zen.com. And that's interesting. That's, outward bound Zen sort of thing. That's really neat. I'd like to go do that with him. I don't know if I can get over there. But the science of Zen is very, very well thought out, and he's put a lot into it. And I was really interested in it. Ever since we talked, I've been thinking about it. Now and then, he gives a neat little frame of reference for, what's going on in the head. The understanding of stuff like that is always evolving. And I think he's pretty up to date with what they're saying these days. Anyway, look, let's just go on and give him a call and see what he has to say about all this. So let's do that, though, after our pause to meditate. So when you hear the bell, if you're of such a mind, hit pause and meditate or whatever for as long as you wish. And when you're through, hit unpause. And we'll hit the bell to end the meditation or whatever, and we'll give Barry Crawford a call. Hi, Barry.
Hi.
How you doing?
Good. Can you hear me well?
Yeah. Hey, it's hard to get a picture of you. You're modest. To find a picture of you for the last podcast, I had to go to your Facebook page, and there was only one good one. I could have taken you out of a group picture there.
That photo is probably 15 years old.
Well, it looks pretty much like you look now. But I'd suggest you put a picture of yourself on Simplicity Zen. People will want to see you.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
I
Yeah.
mean, I did, and you're a very handsome man. So
Oh, I totally agree. I'm just kidding.
last week we had a brief podcast with you. It
hmm
was nice, uh,
hmm
and just talked about your practice and your life and that, and I found it very interesting. Um, but I had noticed in on Simplicity Zen you had two other sites.
hmm
One, your outdoors stuff,
hmm
uh, and Sierra. What's that called?
Sierra Foothills Zen, right?
Oh, Sierra Foothills Zen.
Yeah.
Oh, well, wait. All right. I just want to ask you I haven't looked at it yet. I looked at the science site. What did Sierra Foothills Zen site?
Well, that started. So in the Clear Mind lineage where I got ordained, it's very service oriented, and so
It's
as
very
part of
what
my
oriented?
service,
Oh yeah. Okay.
so as part of my training, I was expected to start a sitting group or be a prison chaplain or a hospital chat, like some sort of service oriented like that. But it was right in the midst of the COVID pandemic, and so I started this kind of outdoor meditation program, and I do it through. There's a local nature conservancy organization called American River Conservancy up here in the foothills.
Mm-hmm.
It's a great organization. I love it. But so I kind of partner with them where I use their land to offer these kind of mindfulness Zen things. Initially, it was just basically like a silent hike, but it's kind of morphed into where the first third of it I do a little kind of like real basic qigong exercise. I'm basically a qigong novice, so
Yeah.
and I set those expectations. I don't pretend to be a master teacher at it or anything, but just I lead them through some real basic qigong exercises I've been taught, and then we do. Then the second third of it is a silent hike through the foothills, rolling oak forest up here, and then the last third is we kind of sit facing this really picturesque lake, and I do like a kind of a guided meditation there. And so it's um, a lot of people just come for the nature or the qigong, but it's so it's not like traditional Soto Zen or anything, but it's I think a lot of people originally came from the qigong, but come to really like the meditation.
Hmm.
So and
Hmm.
so even though it's kind of safer to sit inside now, it's been popular enough where I've just continued it.
Huh. So if somebody wants to participate that or learn more about it, they write. They go online and go to sierrafoothillszen.org.
.com. .com. This one's .com. Yeah.
sierrafoothillszen.com.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that sounds neat. That sounds neat.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That would be good for me to do.
Yeah. It's fun. It's fun sitting outside. I set up some camping chairs, and then if the weather's nice, I'll set up some zabutons and zafu, and you can sit, staring at this really beautiful, picturesque lake.
Wait a minute. You're hiking with zabutons and zavus?
No, it's so there's a lake that we go around, and so we go left to hike around the lake, but I go right to set up all the sitting areas. So it's really I have a wagon, so I'm really only going about 100 feet into the hike with all.
Oh yeah, I see.
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah.
Well, that sounds great. Now, I looked at your Science of Zen dot.
Yeah. Hey, before we dive into that, I did want to say one thing. So I listened to our talk that you put up the other night.
Yeah.
And it made it sound like that I don't like socially engaged Zen. And I wanted to I just want to qualify. I think like the point, my belief on the matter isn't that I don't think socially engaged Zen is worthwhile. My point is, I don't think it's great when a Zen center that becomes the dominant practice. Not that it shouldn't exist at all,
Yeah.
So that and I won't name any names just because it would be awkward. But I mean, I think it's the minority of Zen centers that I think would fall into that category.
Fall into the category of being overwhelmed by socially engaged.
Yeah, and I love like organizations like the Buddhist Peace Fellowship and stuff like that. So I'm not
Yeah,
against that kind of stuff. It's just more, it's our time on this earth is so preciously short. I really like to see Zen centers really like laser focused on awakening specifically, because
yeah.
there's so many other wonderful outlets for the many other important things in life. I like to see Zen centers kind of focused on that. But listening to it, I kind of cringed a little bit, feeling like it sounded like I was just against it in general, and that's not the
Well,
case.
I
Yeah,
don't know. I feel like you were just saying it was out of balance. I mean,
yeah,
at
yeah.
certain places.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely feel that. And also, you know, engaged Buddhism, you know what it was in Japan in in the first half of the last century? It was putting the emperor above Buddha and
Right.
sanctioning war
Hmm.
and troops, monks becoming soldiers with
Hmm.
the blessing of the organizations. So that was
Hmm.
engaged Buddhism. They were
Right.
engaged. That's
Yep.
and they fall in line there, you know. So
Hmm.
uh, the idea that I just say engaged Buddhism is doing what you want to do in action through a sort of lens of Buddhism with your understanding of it.
Yeah. I mean, the distinction I make for myself, and I'm not saying other people should follow this distinction, is I think where Zen really shines is in investigating how we or how I should behave, right?
Yeah.
What I'm less excited about is using Zen as a vehicle of telling other people how they should behave. If
Ooh,
that makes
yeah,
sense.
good. Well
Yeah.
said. Well said.
Yeah. And again, if someone disagrees with me, I mean that's fine. I'm not like totally upset by it, but that's just the distinction I make.
Yeah.
I don't want to use my religion as a vehicle for trying to tell other people how they should
Right.
view the world or live their lives.
Right.
I mean, there are other vehicles where I'm happy to tell people how they should live their lives and so forth. I really like, I don't think, but I like to keep that out of religion.
Yeah. Well, there's a tremendous amount of engaged Catholicism.
Hmm.
And basically, they're not telling other people how to live their lives.
Right.
There's communities of nuns and
Mm-hmm.
brothers and monks that are
Mm-hmm.
just into good deeds, serving the poor. Are so I think if engaged Buddhism is trying to relieve suffering, that is of course a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I haven't been to any of our classes, but the Soto Sangha I sit with, they have some stuff where they was kind of like unpacking racism, but I kind of like their approach, how they handle it. They're talking about like what's your relationship to racism, as opposed to you know here's what's wrong with racism, and it's just, here's what other people should be doing. I like that approach.
Yeah. Yeah. I know when I see that, I think, oh, I don't want to go to one of those meetings. Uh, I like being here with people. There's all sorts of people, mainly dark people. And most of my friends are dark skinned, and I really don't have to worry about it. uh, yeah.
Well, anyway, sorry about the tangent. I felt a little cringy when I was listening to the interview. I'm like, oh boy, I hope people don't get the wrong idea of what I meant here.
Well, you did something nobody else has ever done, and I really appreciated it. You said, "Ooh, I got to cut out 4 seconds." I cut out 4 seconds from it. I really didn't want anybody to hear. And so here's the MP3. I did it. All I had to do was upload it. That was great. So if you want to go back and do that, mess with
No,
it.
that's fine.
Yeah, you can stick it in, man. I do that sometimes. I come in and I just stick it in. I say, oh, I have to listen to this. I want to make clear so-and-so or something. So I don't care.
Yeah.
Anyway,
No, we're good.
I think that subject it's like third rail or something. People are hesitant to talk about it. There are certain things that it's just better not to get involved with, like I think I won't mention them because I don't want to get involved. So, can we move to Science of Zen?
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
So, I tell it, Science of Zen. And I'm interested in what you have to say. I'm also interested in science, not as a student of science, but as a I would rather have scientists running the world right now than anybody. But please tell us about the Science of Zen dot which one?
Oh, .org. That one's scienceofzen.org.
Scienceofzen.org.
Right. And so that was actually another one of my kind of priest training service projects. I kind of did two of them. And so kind of at a fundamental level, I've always been interested in science. I grew up, I guess as an atheist. And so even though I've experienced things that are, unequivocally like supernatural, I guess you could say, I still feel like my worldview is still largely science-based and, or at least rational, I'd like to think, and if I'm totally honest, my introduction to spirituality and practice was through psychedelics, and that is very much chemicals tickling neurotransmitters and creating some sort of process in the brain. And so even though I don't see psychedelics as a full path, or anything beyond more than like, something's going on here, it's worth your time to investigate a spiritual path. I don't think psychedelics in and of themselves are a complete path at all, and obviously full of dangers on many levels. However, the fact that it was an introduction to me, made me realize, well, there is definitely a neurobiological aspect to practice to start with. So I've always been favorably predisposed to, kind of a scientific view of this type of stuff. And, so I've been interested in Zen since, the very early 90s. I think 91, 92 was my first year sitting. I think 92 was my first session. I can't remember. Maybe 91 was the first time I saw Zen at all. But anyway, so this whole time I've always been interested in, what's the science of meditation? What's the science of Zen and, science of awakening and all this kind of stuff. And frankly, for the vast majority of that time, the science just wasn't there. They a lot of the stuff we understand kind of as the basis for it, just they didn't even know it existed, let alone were they measuring it. And so it's really starting about 10 years ago, but even more so, increasing in speed about 4 or 5 years ago, the science has really started catching up to understanding kind of the neurological basis of practice. And, and that's with a little bit of a caveat that what science is really good at explaining is kind of the basis of dukkha, the basis of suffering. What science is not anywhere close at all to explaining is the very existing of consciousness at all, you know. And so, I think a lot of people kind of see what I'm doing as like kind of an overly materialist type of thing, and I've gotten that feedback a lot, but I still think there's tons of mystery, and I'm not at all convinced that consciousness comes from neurological, firing, fundamentally. If I had to guess, I think consciousness is more like a fundamental, fact of the universe, and it's just one of many resources that the brain makes use of, to keep this kind of body mind alive in the world while I'm here. Kind of like the brain makes use of electricity, it makes use of heat and thermodynamics, right? These are all dynamics of the universe that the body, that living organisms can make use of, and I think consciousness probably falls in that category too. So anyway, so with that caveat, I want to say what the science has done really good at explaining is kind of the neurological basis of self, and why that neurological base of self kind of leads to suffering. And one thing that's really interesting that the science has shown is, early on, I kind of assumed that there's some part of the brain, that's like the spiritual, like lobe or something, right? And the scientists will discover like, oh, you tickle that lobe and boom, you have a non-dual experience or whatever, and I thought there was like machinery kind of built into the brain, to produce mystical experiences. And what's really fascinated me, and in retrospect, it should have been obvious, is what they've discovered is not so much that there's machinery in the brain to produce mystical experiences or spiritual experiences, or kind of create a path to awakening. It's more like when certain parts of the brain shut down or disengage, that's when the magic happens. So it's not so much that the brain is designed for awakening. It's when certain parts of the brain that kind of create dukkha are downgraded in their activity. That's when interesting practice dynamics happen. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, I understand what you're saying. I basically am just listening.
Yeah.
I don't know what to think.
Right. Yeah. And so do you just want me to monologue about this for a little bit, or do you have questions? Or
explain what the science is. I mean, you've got charts and stuff. I don't know if charts right. You've got graphics on your site, and you go into specifics. The way I tend to see it is more like Hindu Advaita Vedanta, which is that the only reality is awareness, and everything else is like a dream. Ramana Maharshi called normal waking consciousness dream 1, and then when we sleep, dream 2. And so I sort of see it that way. And Suzuki sort of talked about it. He didn't talk about dreams that way too. But I think it's better to be grounded in the physical, and so did Suzuki, Shunryu Suzuki, and grounded in nature, grounded in the physical. I'm really interested in what the science has to say. I really think it's best not to believe things that are, I think belief is sort of the enemy of religious practice, and you just experience things. But scientific approach isn't, because it's not attached to the theory or the hypothesis. They're all can be challenged. and they'll all
Mm-hmm.
change usually in time.
Mm-hmm.
Or the consensus understanding of it will change in time. Yeah, I'm just interested in what you have to say. But I just think everything's a mystery and incomprehensible. And I
Mm-hmm.
like practice. And I like peace of mind.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I'm interested in what you have to say. So, and I was interested in your site and what I saw.
Mm-hmm.
But you should explain or give us a taste of it or something.
Sure, great. Yeah, so I think a good entry point is kind of look at kind of Buddhism 101 stuff. Kind of the Four Noble Truths and Three Poisons and Three Truths and sort of stuff. And so where I would start is kind of maybe a very kind of colloquial look at the Four Noble Truths, right? So the first noble truth would be essentially, humans experience, various degrees of pervasive dissatisfaction in their lives. Obviously it's, dukkha is often translated as suffering. And I think that can confuse people because a lot of people say, well, like, I'm not suffering all the time. But if you really, of course, my experience is anecdotal, but, I've known a lot of people in my life, and I've really not known too many people that really seem fundamentally at peace in their lives. You know, you know, I mean, it's just, like, think about my neighbors and, you know, many family members over the years and many friends over the years, a lot of people that, just really struggle. And for some people it's subtle, like, some people are just bored all the time, and that's a form of dukkha.
Yeah.
Some people just, you're happy and they have a wonderful family and, the fulfilling career, fun hobbies, but if you really talk to them, you can really get a sense that, just something just doesn't feel totally right for them.
Yeah.
And so, I think, and so instead of saying, suffering, I like I like to say kind of like pervasive dissatisfaction,
Yeah. Yeah. That's good.
and that doesn't mean that there's not joy in life. It just means that there's just too much dissatisfaction. It's like things are more complex and more difficult than they really need to be. And so that's kind of, the first truth. And the second truth is, again, to kind of put it very colloquially, is, you know, people have that dissatisfaction because they have expectations, right? You want things to go the way you want them to go. You crave certain things, and that can kind of be broken down further, at a real kind of, you know, fundamental level. People crave, or head towards pleasure and are aversive to um, discomfort or pain, right? That's just really fundamentally baked into our, kind of our machinery as an organism, and that's something that exists in organisms probably, millions and millions of years of ancestors behind us. And if you think about what, like, the third patriarch said, the I'm going to mangle this, but the way is no problem. Just don't pick or choose, or don't see good or bad. It's been translated as various ways, but that's kind of what that's getting at. Is just this fundamental need for pleasure and in kind of aversive to displeasure, because at a very simple organism, something's pleasure is like carbohydrates, mating, protein, right? Or whereas aversion is like, it wants to eat me. It's too hot, So they're the variables of their environment were very simple. So that kind of living your life based on those principles makes sense. And even humans, on one level, we're incredibly successful. I mean, there's billions of us, and there's been many billions of us, and so, I mean, obviously we're successful as a species. But the problem is that evolution does not select for our happiness, right? It selects for our fitness and surviving and passing our genes on to the next generation. And so, so this fundamental need to, dualistic need to chase pleasure and flee discomfort, while wildly successful from an evolutionary survival standpoint, kind of sucks from an individual standpoint of being happy, because we're always chasing that, and which wouldn't be a problem if the world existed exactly how we wanted to, and that kind of brings you to the second truth, which is the world's chaotic and changing. There's impermanence. So we're just fundamentally designed to never fully be satisfied in our expectations. So our expectations aren't met, and we suffer. I think I'm mangling the Four Noble Truths a little bit. I think I'm combining two, but anyway. But then there's a path to then there's a path to liberation. Well, anyway, so how would this map to a a kind of neurobiological view of practice? Well, so it turns out the brain is kind of divided not so much by regions, right? So there's maybe there's a region called the posterior cingulate cortical area or something, right? So that's a part of the brain. But it turns out by the way the brain kind of operates and is organized is really by networks, right? So parts of the brain that are kind of on various different areas, geographical areas inside the brain, they work together to accomplish tasks. And I guess it's about 15 years now, maybe 12 years ago, they discovered that there's one brain network called the default mode network. And it's composed of, and what people kind of say is in the default mode network and what's not, will vary from kind of definition to definition. But generally speaking, there's two major aspects of the default mode network that kind of stand out. The first is it's the network in the brain that's active when we're not actively focused on something, right? So if you're assembling IKEA furniture, or you're having to navigate an accident in front of you in the freeway, or or you're having to do your taxes, right? So you're engaged in a task. So when you're doing that, the default mode network kind of largely goes quiet. But when there's not like a really complex task in front of you, or maybe there's not a lion chasing down on you or something, so the brain kind of uses that kind of downtime to do processing, and the processing that it does is very self-referential. And so kind of does two major qualities. One is extremely self-referential, and it's extremely time oriented. It's never about what's happening right now. It's all about the future within the context of the path. So you can, in that sense, you could say it's narrative, right? There's a story. There's stuff that's happened to me. There's stuff that's going to happen to me, and sometimes it's trivial. Anyone who's sat there in Zazen, sometimes the default mode network is like, I haven't had Thai food for a while, or like. Or it could be like, Evander Holyfield, you could arguably say he's the best boxer of all time. Sometimes it's stuff like that, but generally it's planning for the future from a self-referential standpoint, right? Yeah. So they called it the default mode network because it's the default part of the brain that's running when we're not kind of doing anything very task oriented. And I hinted at the second part of it is that it's largely built around self-referential thinking, but it also does some other things that are really interesting. And so even if you're doing an active task that's self-referential, like someone says, like, "What's your favorite color?" or who was your best friend in third grade, right? So the default mode network will light up on tasks on active tasks that are self-referential. And certain parts of the default mode network are really focused on what they call theory of mind, and that's trying to figure out what other people are thinking, usually what they're thinking in terms of you. And so, kind of the social experience of us, of me and you, like the default mode network's super involved with that type of cognition too. But here's some also interesting things about the default mode network. It's the number one craver. It's the thing that makes the distinction. This is what I need to feel safe and healthy and happy, right? And so I mentioned that kind of underlying need to always experience pleasure and avoid discomfort. Well, the default mode network is the part of the brain that strategizes how to maximize that calculus, right? And it's also, so that's the craving, right? And then it's also part of the brain that clings, that gets addicted to things, like doesn't want things to change that are good, worries that things may not last that are good, worries that bad things are going to come, right? So again, it's applying like the past and the future, and what kind of underpins all of that is I guess what we could call habitual cognition. And so the default mode network, and kind of in working with some other brain regions, but it kind of coordinates this, is it creates what I would like to call a map of the world, right? Like kind of like a map of how the world works from a self-referential perspective in terms of what maximizes pleasure and what what kind of maximizes avoiding discomfort. And so as a result, so basically it creates a conceptual map of the world in that respect, right? And so if you think about it, a lot of what we've already said that the default mode network does are a lot of kind of the fundamental things of Buddhism. It's a sense of self, right? And in terms of self, neurobiologists kind of break that up into two levels, which I think makes perfect sense from a practice point of view. They call it, one of it's the minimal or embodied sense of self. And that's like, I'm me, I'm right here, I'm a physical thing. If I pinch my knee, you're not feeling the pain. If you pinch your knee, I'm not feeling the pain. You're over there, you have your thoughts, I'm over here, I have my thoughts. My body's occupying this space, right? So that kind of embodied self, the default mode, some of the default mode networks components are involved with that, right? And in a lot of like kind of non-self experiences people claim to have, either on psychedelics or just from meditation, kind of involve that level of the self, like a disruptive sense of embodied self. But then there's another self that the default mode network is almost exclusively in charge with, and that would be the narrative sense of self. I'm me, these are my memories, this is what I need, this is what might happen to me, this is who I am, I've existed in the past, I'm going to exist in the future, even more horrifically, I'm not going to exist far into the future, right? So it's a time-oriented self-referential thinking, and scientists call it the narrative sense of self, and I think that's a great name for it. So I use it, in my stuff too. And as it turns out, it's not the embodied sense of self that's the source of suffering. It's the narrative sense of self. At least I strongly believe, and I think all the evidence strongly points to that. It's worrying about the future, conceptualizing our place in the world, making assumptions about reality, behaving habitually, thinking habitually, all these kind of self-oriented cognitive functions. These are what's caused suffering. Me being a physical being here, like the fact that, when I eat, you don't get full. Like that's not really causing suffering. And what confuses the situation is oftentimes, people can have non-self experiences. And if you really dive into the scientific literature and also the kind of the religious / spiritual literature, you can kind of see that people are having different types of non-self experiences. Some people are having purely embodied non-self experiences, right? And I think anyone who's tried hallucinogenics or sat for a long time has these type of experiences. I've been at retreats where, there's just no difference between me and the wall in front of me. Like, there's no separation, right? Or the bell rings and like, oh my God, I am that bell ring. Or like, I've had crickets for some reason get me a lot. A lot of times like in the kind of a deep samadhi state, I have a hard time kind of separating from the cricket sounds, or you see someone, you're like, oh, that's me, like I'm that person, like and then even things like out of body experiences, that's a disruption of the embodied sense of self. Shamanistic journeys, that's a disruption of the embodied sense of self. And I think a lot of times people have these, oh, my body doesn't exist anywhere. My body is infinite. You have all these experiences, and a lot of people think, well, the Buddha said there's no self, and I just had an experience of no self. I'm like, oh, that's enlightenment, right?
Mhm.
Well, if you think back to the Buddha's biography, he was a master meditator, right? And he mastered, various like really advanced trance meditative states. And what was his conclusion? Like those don't lead, and those trance states were very much involved a disruptive sense of self. If you get down to it, I don't have the names in front of me. I don't remember, but infinite space and time, and all that kind of stuff. But those are all disruptive sense of selves, but they don't. Those don't lead to liberation. And I remember when I would first have those experiences, I'd be like, aha, enlightenment, and I've talked to other people, it's like, aha, enlightenment, but those aren't true. From a Buddhist perspective, not awakening experiences. But then we look at the other sense of self, the narrative sense of self, the one that causes suffering, dukkha. That when that drops away, that's when there's peace, I believe. And like I said, what often confuses things is those two sets of selves, since they share some neural machinery, they'll often drop at the same time.
Hmm.
And plus, a lot of times the dropping the embodied sense of self will kind of correlate to jhana states. So there's like 8 jhana states, kind of 4 primary ones. The first jhana, second jhana, third jhana, fourth. Like the first 2 of those, maybe arguably the third, like they involve like really blissful experiences. So a lot of times, someone will be in a deep meditative absorption, and they'll be in like a jhana blissful state, and then they'll drop the embodied sense of self. Well, since my self went away and I'm feeling this joy, like this must be enlightenment, But those are transitory experiences, and from the Buddhist perspective, they're creative. There's a cause and effect there. Whereas nirvana, awakening, exists outside of the context of cause and effect. It's uncreated, unborn, right? And so anyway, so the point I'm trying to get to is when you really look at a sense of the self and how the brain creates it, it's this narrative sense of self that that causes suffering, right? And sometimes it's very subtle, like you're at the supermarket and you're feeling bored, you're in line, and like the checker's taking forever. Like you left your phone in the car, so you have nothing to there's no escapist opportunities. So that's boredom, right? That's a form of dukkha. Or maybe, like, oh my God, my loved one lost their job, and what are we going to do? So it's all this kind of future, like it's unwillingness to either experience discomfort now or in the future. So it's that narrative worry, right? And from my own experience and talking to other people, and if you really look closely at all the Zen and Buddhist literature, it's this narrative sense of self that's causing suffering. So the goal is like, what do you do? So there's this pervasive sense of narrative self-referential thinking that's causing all this problem. So what do? Right? Well, you think, well, I will just live in the moment, right? I'm going to decide to live in the moment, or I'm not going to have this delusive thinking. Well, that doesn't work, right? I mean, like, or let's say, you have a problem with cake, right? There's this cake there. Well, I'm not going to eat it because I'll have a stomach ache and I already weigh too much. Next thing you know, you've eaten 3/4 of the cake. Or, you're stuck in a bad relationship, and even though it's objectively true that you're not going to, you'd be happier outside of this relationship, but you don't leave, or it's, you tend to avoid, I don't know, like doing your taxes or you avoid doing your dishes, like, so like all these habitual behaviors and thinking that are causing problems in your life, but you're doing them anyway. Why? Even though from a an analytical perspective, the best thing to do, you're not doing it for some reason, right? Or a lot of times, the way you envision reality is so skewed, you couldn't even make a right decision because the assumptions about reality that your brain have made are just false. They're delusional, right? A big one for me is, for years, I thought the world was just full of jerks, right? Everyone, I mean, in fairness, there's still jerks out there, right? But, at a very early age, I think like eighth grade, I had a group of friends in elementary school, and we had a falling out like in the summer in between sixth grade and seventh grade. And that was going from elementary school to middle school. And, and so I started middle school without a group of friends. And there was for about 3-week period there where I was just kind of friendless in middle school. And that was a scary spot. I got a little bit of bullying, and then I moved, and then when I moved to California, that kind of happened again in high school. And really, like in totality, there was maybe 2 months total where I kind of experienced some bullying and some friendless times. The rest of the time, I had good friend groups and close relationships, and and people to hang out with and stuff. But for whatever reason, well, not for whatever reason, social isolation is such a, in our evolutionary context, being isolated from the tribe, being cast out of the tribe, socially ostracized, was a death sentence, right? If you're living in the Serengeti or something, right? And so my brain decided at a really fundamental level that my survival was endangered by social ostracization, and my brain made the decision my default mode network at a fundamental level had made the decision that other people are scary and they do things that, and there's always this risk of social ostracization, right? And so through so much of my life, I saw the world through those lenses, and so, and I just see like things that, I assume that, everyone was kind of, not everyone, but often were out to get me, or maybe this group is conspiring to not include me, often very subtly, and often I wouldn't even totally realize I was kind of making those determinations. But, I was making life way more complex than it needed to be for myself. And, luckily through practice, I kind of, that type of thinking, it became clear that it was delusional thinking. And I was just making up these narrative stories in my head. I've kind of lost a track of the point I was making.
No, it's good. It's good.
But yeah, so anyway, there's this narrative sense of self, that causes all these problems. Oh, I remember the point. Well, and so even to the point where, yes, and so sometimes, you have the delusional sense of reality, but even when you have an accurate sense of reality, like eating that cake is bad for me, you're still doing it anyway. And why is that? And that's because the default mode network is making decisions based on the payoff of getting pleasure and avoiding pain, right? It drives the show. In our analytical kind of IKEA furniture assembling part of the brain, which is called the central executive network, it just, as it turns out, has very little power to control the default mode network. And so that's why willpower doesn't work that well, and that's why, or often doesn't work well, like usually.
What was the second thing? What was the second thing you said? Oh, you said often doesn't work that well.
Yeah, often doesn't work. Because sometimes, because a lot of times you can convince yourself, the emotional payoff to do what my central executive network, that's going to give me the best emotional payoff. And so the feeling payoff. And so you're able so sometimes then you're able to reason your way out of stuff, but it's rare, and it's hard. And we often, And so the central executive network is really crappy at controlling, out of control self-referential thinking and self-referential behavior, habitual behavior. So what do we do? Well, you look at the Eightfold Path and what were the culminating things, and the second to last is mindfulness, right? And in mindfulness, though lots of people define it in different ways, really it can be distilled down to present moment awareness. You're being aware in the present moment. And if you look at the underlying neurobiological engine of present moment awareness, is yet another brain network called the oh boy, I'm spacing it. We'll just call it the attentional network, right?
The what?
And so
the what?
The attentional network.
Attentional.
Attention. Here, I'm having a brain fart. Let me look real quick.
Like paying attention. The attentional network.
The dorsal attention network. Thank you. Yeah.
The what?
Right. Anyway, so the dorsal attention network.
Dorsal.
And just dorsal.
That's
side.
what fish have.
You're right.
Or is that porpoises? All right. Anyway, what does dorsal mean?
Yeah, or I guess dorsal. Yeah, dorsal's up top. And so,
wait. What does dorsal mean?
I think it means up top.
At top?
I think so.
Mm-hmm.
Let me look it up real quick. The upper side, yeah, upper or back side.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah, and anyway, so just to review, there's three networks we've talked about, right? So the default mode network, which is the seed of habitual behavior and self-referential thinking, clinging, craving, all the kind of good dukkha stuff. Then there's the central executive network, which is, and these can all map to the aggregates, which I won't get into now. But then there's the central executive network, which is kind of rational, willful problem solving. And now there's the new one, which is the dorsal attention network. And that's the network that's in charge of present moment awareness, mindfulness, being aware in the present moment. And so here's kind of the fulcrum that this all kind of rests upon. So it turns out that the default mode network in the dorsal attention network, self-referential thinking and present moment awareness, they're what scientists call anti-correlated. So when one is active, the other one is automatically shut down. Not entirely shut down, obviously, but often quieted significantly.
Mm.
And so, for example, if you're if you're sitting there in Zazen and nothing's kind of grabbing your attention from the external or internal world, you're not having an itch in your knee, or there's not a fly buzzing around your ear or something, you're free to kind of to ruminate and daydream and think from a self-referential and time-focused, past and future-focused perspective, right? But then let's say there's a loud bang in the back of the Zendo. Boom, your attention goes to the present moment. That's the dorsal attention network. Or so it turns out these things are anti-correlated. And so since the default mode network is in charge of self-referential thinking, the narrative self, and that's kind of the basis of dukkha, it turns out that having present moment awareness, or tuning down the default mode network, reduces suffering. It literally, they can't both be happening at the same time. And so if you kind of look at human behavior, you see it all the time.
In what human behavior?
When you look at human behavior,
yeah,
you're seeing this at play. Like, so quieting down the default mode network with the present moment awareness network, the dorsal attention network, it's a $1 billion industry. Television, movies, sports, books, drugs, drinking, dancing, right? All these things that bring you out of self-referential thinking and bring you into the present moment, they give relief, right? And you can even take it to its maximum degree. And when you kind of do sporting stuff that puts people in a flow state, that's the maximal, non-self-referential standpoint someone can be in kind of just naturally, right? It's almost like it is a type of samadhi even.
Yeah.
And so there's all these things people do to kind of, and they're all so popular because they're quieting down the default network and giving us a kind of a moment of peace in the midst of all this, self-referential drama. But there's two problems with, escapist things like this. One is it's temporary, right? The respite only lasts as long as you're doing the escapist activity. And second of all, a lot of these escapist activities either have opportunity costs or cause problems themselves. For example, if your escapist activity is heroin, right? like arguably doesn't solve the problem, right? But even something like painting Dungeons and Dragon figurines, you're doing this 8 hours a day. There's an opportunity cost, and you're not really solving the problem. You're just escaping from it, while you're doing this activity, right? So escapism is not a good strategy. So what do we do, right? Well, remembering that present moment awareness quiets down at a physical level, quiets down self-referential chatter of the default mode network. What we can do is the central executive network, which can't directly tell the default mode network to shut up, can indirectly do it by deciding to pay attention, right? You can decide, I'm going to pay attention right now. I'm going to focus on my breath. I'm going to sit here quietly, or I'm going to count my breath, or I'm going to do shikantaza, right? You're deciding to pay attention. You're remembering to pay attention. And if you actually look at the Sanskrit word for mindfulness, it's actually it means to remember. And that's really what mindfulness is you're remembering to pay attention in the present moment.
Oh, that's very interesting. That's sort of roundabout. If the root for mindfulness is really to remember, you've got to take a jump from remembering to not remembering. It's sort of to remember, not to remember.
Right, and I'll get there. I'm almost there. And so that's basic mindfulness is remembering to be mindful. And this is something that people can use immediate in their lives, right? Let's say, someone says something rude to you and you're kind of ruminating, blah, 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 blah. There's all this chatter. Like, even if you've never meditated a day in your life, at that point you can say, like, you know what? I'm going to bring my attention to the present moment, how my body feels. I'm going to, of course, one thing you could do is you could go get drunk or watch a TV show so you don't have to think about it. Or you could turn the light inwards and focus on the present moment. And if you actually pay attention, the self-referential chatter goes away almost immediately, right?
Yeah.
But you still have like all the adrenaline chemicals in your body, so you don't feel better immediately. But being able to kind of cut off that chatter, which almost always is based on false, delusive stuff anyway. So it's not psychological bypassing to ignore delusion, right? What that allows you to do is you're able to kind of come back. You're able to kind of calm down. You're all revved up from a sympathetic nervous system. That allows you to kind of calm down quicker by just deciding to shut down that chatter.
Right. Now, you know what this makes me think of? I never thought of it this way, but a very common bit of advice for someone who's like something happened immediately that they want to strike out, they're angry, is to count to 10. Right?
Yeah.
So that is
absolutely.
Looking at what you're talking about. That's really giving the dorsal, what's it called again?
You're invoking the dorsal intentional network to be present while you're counting, and that's quieting down the default mode network.
Right, right. Well, you know what? All right, tell me about this. So I would say that impulsive desire is associated with the default network, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I, have sexual desire, and it would be very easy for me to have casual sex here, right?
Mm-hmm.
With
Mm-hmm.
foreigners, with very easy. I mean, there's prostitutes on our street.
Mm-hmm.
But all right, so that's one thing. That's maybe
Mm-hmm.
default. But then
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't really bother me because I just say, nah, lose your peace of mind. You know,
Right.
that's dangerous
Yeah.
territory. I've done that. I was younger. Doesn't pay off. And then what I do is I say, just pretend you've already done it. And now it's over. And that was good.
Mm-hmm.
uh, and so that sort of, again, returns me to the dorsal attentive network. I have that a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I can really see why older men, are always getting in trouble and thinking they're attractive and
Right.
lying to themselves and stuff about it.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway,
Yep.
so it's the 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 stronger urge is to want immediate gratification, and
Right.
the weaker urge is to realize it just to want peace of mind, right?
Yeah.
And but it dominates. It actually but it could be, I could lose it any day.
Yeah. And plus, and sometimes the default mode network makes good decisions, right? It doesn't always make bad decisions.
Oh,
Like the default mode network can decide losing my wife and my career and my kids is more painful than a short-term sexual conquest would be pleasurable, right?
right,
So it could sometimes it models reality accurate,
right,
and so a lot of times our default isn't always bad, but it's bad enough
yeah,
that there's too much suffering in life,
right, right. I
Yeah.
mean, I think, but I also think, well, really, there's nothing wrong with it, but
Yeah.
it just wouldn't work out. My wife, you got to always say they'll find out. And I used to say when I was younger, even when I figured it out, I used to say, no, my subconscious will tell my wife's subconscious what I'm doing.
Yeah.
I won't be able to stop it. It's going to happen, and it's going to hurt our relationship. And we won't break up forever, but it'll always be there. All right, so go on.
All right, so thank you. So the stage we're at now is where we're taking, we're doing tactical mindfulness. Either we're deciding to be mindful when we're sitting, or we're smart enough to be able to catch ourselves when we're having an emotional reaction. We're able to be mindful there, right? We're remembering to pay attention. But here's what's really interesting, and this is kind of where practice kind of comes in, is when so neurobiological researchers, who take brain scans of people, there's something called functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRI, and you basically take a snapshot of what is happening in the brain. They measure like oxygen, like where's oxygen being used, right? And and that kind of magnetizes differently, so they're able to take a picture of it. And one thing these guys, so whenever they do meditation studies or really any brain studies at all, they always take a resting state image, so they have something to compare to whatever they're measuring, right? So that maybe it's a study where they're measuring what part of the brain lights up when you do math. Maybe that's the study, right? So they'll do a resting state image, and then they'll do whatever they're trying to measure for. And so when they were doing these studies for meditators, they would take a resting state of these meditators, and then they would ask them to meditate, right? And they do these for beginners meditators, like let's just take a snapshot of resting state. Okay, now I want you to meditate, and we'll take a snapshot. And then they did it for experienced meditators, let's take the resting state just so we have a baseline, and then we'll ask them to meditate. And what they discovered was, for the experienced meditators, and I think that's usually around like 8,000 to 7,000 hours of meditation, kind of be in that what they consider an experienced meditator, is that their default mode network, even in the resting state, was very quiet compared to the average population. And this is where we kind of get to the crux of how practice works, is these people with all these meditation experience, they just had their self-referential narrative self was just much quieter than the average person. And that kind of go, and anyone who's been lucky enough to practice years, that probably maps with their experience. As they've been sitting, life just becomes simpler. There's this less drama. You're thinking a lot. You're not. You're caught by things less. You come to a bit. Emotional baseline quicker, right? And this is all. And here's the really fascinating part: is they got to the point you could show one of these researchers a brain scan of someone, and then they were able to say, so there's another type of MRI. So that was a functional MRI. A regular MRI just takes a picture of the structure of the brain, not what the brain is actually doing. And you could hand one of these researchers just a structural brain image. What's the structure of the brain? And they would be able to say, that's a long-term meditator. That's not a long-term meditator. This is they could actually identify the long-term meditators by the structure of their brains. And so what's happening here is when you're meditating, you're actually reconfiguring the way your brain's kind of put together. Some parts are actually thickened, and I'll talk in a moment about what parts are thickened. But more importantly, the default mode network kind of gets decoupled from the rest part of other parts of the brain, where it's not so much in charge of the show anymore. And so and this is probably the most key thing to understand. The changes that are coming to people's life from this long-term meditation practice is not because the central executive network has decided to think a new philosophy in life. It's not because they've had philosophical insights. It's not because they've decided to live in the moment. It's not because they've, decided to let go. It's not because they've had insight into their childhood, right? But what's actually happening is their brain is changing shape. It's a lot like lifting weights, right? Like someone could come up to me and be like, dude, get bigger muscles. And I could sit there and I'd be like, okay, I'm thinking that I want to have bigger muscles, and my muscles don't get bigger, right? I actually need to physically lift weights to increase my muscle density, right? And meditation is the same way. All the benefits of practice are not there because of any thoughts that you've had. They're there because you've changed the physical structure of your brain.
Right.
You're literally strengthening some areas, shrinking, like the fear centers of the brain actually shrink. The executive and the attentional areas increase. Connections between them change, and so so unfortunately I have to identify another brain network to really fully flesh out this point. So this will be our fourth brain network, and this is the oh boy, let's see here. The salience network. Sorry. Yeah. So now there's the so we have to identify.
Say, I didn't understand it.
The salience network.
Salient.
Yeah, salience. And so the salience network, what it's in charge of is it's constantly kind of running in the background.
What does salient mean?
Salient means what's important.
Oh yeah, salient point.
Right. Exactly. And so the salience network is constantly scanning both inside your body and the world around you, looking for something that's important, right? And the way the salience network works is if nothing important is happening, it says, hey, default mode network, let's use this downtime to plan for the future, right? And so the default mode network says, great, blah, blah, blah. She's mean to me, blah, blah, blah. I'm not attractive to members of the opposite sex, blah, 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 blah. oh, I shouldn't have said that. That's so embarrassing, blah, 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 right? So it's doing its kind of self-referential ruminating. But then you hear a roar. And of course, since the salience network is always scanning the environment, it hears the roar and says, all right, default mode network, shut up. Um, dorsal attention network, I heard a roar. Pay attention and work with the central executive network to solve this problem. We don't want to get eaten, right? So it's good. So basically, the salience network is in charge of switching between the default mode network and the dorsal attention network, switching between self-referential narrative thinking and present moment awareness, kind of as needed, right?
Yeah. Oh, I can give an example. I want to give you an example. Yeah, or you can tell me. All right. I used to ride bicycle a lot in Japan. 30 years ago, I left Japan, right? And there was this little granite slab. It was about 2 feet wide that went over a creek, but it was cement. And it was about probably 6 feet down. And I fell. Finally, it happened. And I lost balance going across it. And I fell. And I hit hard concrete down there. And it didn't really hurt me. It hurt my shoulder where I landed. And I was covered in blood. The gear thing on the bicycle dug into my ankle. I had a white T-shirt on. I was just covered in blood coming down my head. But I couldn't believe it might even have been 7 feet down or something. I thought I'd have broken bones. I got up. And what happened was, as soon as I started to fall, my default network cut off. And I was in a timeless zone that adjusted my body perfectly to land.
Yep. It's exactly right. It's exactly the situation. Yeah. Because when we're doing something that doesn't require a lot of mental activity, such as driving to work or riding to and from work, or anything that's your brain's kind of figured out, the default mode network kind of controls all that, right? Like people can drive from their house to work and barely even be aware of anything going around them because the default mode network is running things. Like, this is habitual. I don't need, we don't need to, we can use this time for planning, right? But the second, as soon as your salience network discovered that there was a problem, it shut off your default mode network, and the present, problem solving and awareness part of your brains took over, and you're able to keep yourself from getting hurt too bad. So yeah, it's a great example. And so what kind of is happening here is, for the average person, from the perspective of suffering, dukkha, the salience network allows the default mode network to have too much of run the show too much, right? In my opinion, as someone who doesn't want to have dukkha, I think the salience network is allowing the default mode network to have too much runtime, right? And with someone who, that's just for an average person, someone who's like quote unquote healthy, right? But people who have anxiety disorders or depressive disorders or, PTSD or what they all share in common is that the salience network keeps the default mode network pretty much turned up to 11 almost all the time, right? And so that's kind of what characterizes all those mental disorders. So like the problem is significantly exaggerated with mental disorders. But even in a healthy person, as evidenced by how much dissatisfaction even like a quote unquote healthy person has, the default mode network is given too much of the runtime. But going back to the experienced meditators who have a much quieter default mode network, what's happening with them is the salience network kind of is decoupled a little bit from the default mode network, and the whole brain is kind of allowed to fire at will, so to speak, right? So you have a more balanced, less ossified, rigid brain structure that's more flexible and dynamic and can respond to events at will, right? So and so basically what happens, and and all across the Zen literature, you hear about self-fulfilling samadhi or effortless samadhi, or samadhi that creates itself, right? So the neurological underpinning of this is the body, the brain, the central nervous system is learned to just be, you kind of have a new default mode. You have a new default, which is mindfulness, being aware, right? And really, even if you stop there, practice is absolutely worth it, right? I mean, that is wonderfully transformative for a person who's gotten to that point in their practice. And one more point I want to make, actually, before I go to the next part, is so far I've talked a lot about practice is all about kind of like getting rid of dukkha and so forth, but there's another aspect, and I first noticed this during sessions or retreats, right? How just little things could just be so wonderful, right? Like I remember I was in one retreat, we were doing our oryoki meal, and I had my Buddha bowl full of brown rice, and I put some some gamasho, the ground sesame seeds and salt on it, and I was eating it, and I just remember, like, this was just the amount of sensory texture and wonderfulness was just almost tear-inducing. It was just so vivid, so amazing. I mean, it left me in awe, right? And you think about, have you ever driven through Yosemite? You're driving through that tunnel, you get through the tunnel, and then you immediately see the wide view of the Yosemite Valley, right? Have you ever done that drive?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's just awe-inspiring. Or you're at the beach and you see this beautiful sunset. It's awe-inspiring. Life in that mode is just so incredibly rich and beautiful. And so that's awe, right? And scientists have actually done a lot of studies about awe. And guess what awe is anti-correlated to?
What?
The default mode network. And so it turns out when the default mode network is quieted down, and I'm not sure they actually know exactly what brain regions produce awe, but when the default mode network is quieted down, awe is much more part of life, right? So not only do you have a quieter sense of self, in a simpler, kind of less drama-filled life, just life itself is just so much full of rich texture, because with the quieter default mode network, you're able to just experience awe so much easier, right? And also, a default mode network remember I said that early on in this discussion, the default mode network is really, like, parts of the default mode network are really like focused on self and other in terms of people, on the theory of mind, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the default mode network is constantly like thinking like them versus me. How are they relating to me, right? So this is what scientists would call an egocentric way of thinking, right? But then there's an allocentric way of thinking, where you're not necessarily seeing reality from you as the center, but you're kind of seeing the relationship between things, or the connections between things. That's called allocentric. And so when the default mode network is allocentric.
ALO?
ALLO. Yeah.
Allocentric.
Allocentric. Yeah. And so when you're in that mode, and you're not kind of seeing oppositions of other people that the default mode network is kind of so in charge, so plays such a big role in, you have a more naturally compassionate view towards life, because you're kind of seeing the bigger picture. It's not a real self-centered point of view. So far, just a review, quieting down the default mode network, either through mindfulness or through long-term practice, where samadhi and mindfulness becomes default. You get three things: a quieter sense of self, more awe, a richer, deeper textured life, and a more compassionate, connected view of reality, right? So you get those three benefits, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'd say even at that point, practice is absolutely like the average person gets there, totally worth it, right? The first hellish 7-day session you do, all the trauma you might encounter, right? Like all the years of boredom on the cushion, absolutely worth it. It's just a wonderful place. It's
Yeah.
just a wonderful place to get your life to, right? But
Yeah.
I'd say there's actually, and I'm kind of wrapping up here. There's one last step you can get to, and I would actually say that's awakening, right? And so, how would I differentiate awakening from a mature, seasoned meditation practice? And I think the difference is wisdom, right? Prajna, and whether it comes suddenly or whether it's something that has come gradually through practice. When you have the wisdom of awareness of emptiness, that the map of reality that we create is just a useful illusion and is actually not reality, like actual true reality, like a true non-dualistic view of reality. When you have that wisdom, that seems to push things into a deeper level where there's kind of a deeper level of peace. And I think a lot of times, kind of at that awakening level, where the brain kind of realizes that its creations are not really real, where it just kind of experientially understands that. That's kind of where you get like the deeper levels of, where the fears of old age, sickness, and death kind of melt away.
The fear of the void?
The fears of old age, sickness, and death.
Fear.
Existential angst.
Yeah.
That seems to be resolved at the awakening.
Right. Something that occurs to me there is the studies in LSD, taking psychedelics. One is showing that people who have taken psychedelics, even a small amount, have better integrated brains and tend to be happier. The complete opposite of what was said by the government or whatever back when I was young. And the other thing is how useful it has been in helping people with terminal disease to, like you say, just greatly reduce or even drop away their fear of dying or anxiety about it. Another thing I thought when you were talking about allocentric is that, like going back to the example of having sexual desire, I not only think, no, I want peace of mind. I think I want my wife to have peace of mind.
Right. Exactly.
Right. And then I realized, actually, I want everybody to have peace of mind. I don't want to do anything to reduce other people's peace of mind. And that involves a certain amount of my default thinking, I wish I hadn't said that or whatever. And I want to say one other thing is that back to Ramana Maharshi, he said, well, normal waking life, that's dream one. He didn't say this a lot. He might have said it once or twice. He said, then when we sleep, that's dream two. And then there's deep sleep. He sort of, and I don't really believe anything. I said, well, this is the way he's looking at it, right? He said, that's phenomenal existence, right? And then the what's real is awareness. And how do you find that awareness? Just look at your sense of self. That's it, And that's why Who Am I is the oldest. We're dating way back in India, koan. Because he said that sense you have of I exist is go into that. That's it. And he said the ultimate religious statement is from the Bible, is I am that I am. So I think that it's very interesting that three marks of existence. One of them is no self. Right?
Right.
Am I saying that correctly?
Yeah, totally. Non-self, no
Yeah.
self. Yeah.
All right. But then often, if you look at what Buddha's saying at other times, and I can't remember what's Mahayana or Theravada, but is that you can't say there's self, you can't say there's no self. You'll see a lot of that too. And I have a friend who's a Theravadan practitioner who stopped reading Crooked Cucumber because he saw Suzuki use the word self in one of the quotes. Anyway, those are things that occurred to me.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, I'm a Mahayana practitioner, so I'm biased. But one teaching I really appreciate from Mahayana is, the two truths. Yes, from the absolute perspective, from the perspective of, awaked in wisdom, there is no self, right?
Right.
The narrative, when the narrative story is shut off, there's only the present moment. There's only this.
Yeah. Right.
There's only there's only the Tathagata. There's just this. There's literally this. Only this, right? But we do live in a reality of, we simultaneously live in a reality of objects, me, you, past, future, good, bad, right? And they're both true. And I think it's the the Heroic Sutra. I can't remember the Sanskrit name, but anyway, a big point of that sutra is, and even in the the Sandokai, according with sameness is still not enlightenment, right? In the White Plum Sangha, translated as encountering the absolute is still not awakening or still not enlightenment. You can have, people can have moments of both no narrative self and no embodied self, right? That's encountering the absolute.
Yeah.
Just this, right? But, our ancestors are telling you that's still not awakening. You need to work. You gotta get past that, where there's no difference between the relative and the absolute.
Right.
And that's obviously something I'm still very much working on myself. But so I think Suzuki was well within the realms of orthodox Mahayana practice to say that there is a self. It's just. That's just one part of the bigger picture,
right? But it's also a way of speaking. Pretty hard. Actually, the person who wrote that to me used the word "I" when they wrote it.
Yeah, and the Buddha constantly is referring to himself and other people, and and he talks about and the Buddha actually even uses the word true self at one point in the Theravada, in the early Buddhist strictures.
Yeah.
That's just not a Mahayana thing. So but even true self is is this a skillful mean, saying like true self or true nature. I mean, that's just it's not a thing. That's just a skillful
it's all skillful means. I mean, Suzuki said you cannot speak the truth. It's you're always speaking half of it. He also said, there is no way to enter into awakening through emptiness. You enter into it through form. And Nagarjuna said, to emphasize emptiness over form is better never to have heard of it.
Right. Yeah. And he even said emptiness. He even said emptiness is empty. Any conceptualization is missing the mark. Yeah. And actually, and that's a kind of a point I probably should have said earlier about differentiation between awakening and just a mature practice. And I really think it comes down to a sense of identity, knowing who you are from a wisdom perspective. It's not so much, from a conceptual perspective, but actually seeing, like, kind of like, let's say you're like locked in a room and your whole life, and you've and the lights are so low you can only kind of see things in grayscale, right? And you spent 40 years in this room, and you only seen white, gray, and black, right? Those are the only three colors you see. Then all of a sudden, for the first time, someone opens the door, and you see outside the door, and you see red, and then someone closes that door, right? So now you have the experiential wisdom that red exists, right? Someone could have said, "Hey, red exists," and you've been like, "Okay, great, that's cool." But once you've seen red exists, you have new experiential wisdom, right? And I think awakening works the same way. Is where when you really see, what your identity is, you've seen it, right? And that just kind of changes everything. And again, I think it can be gradual, or I think it can be sudden, or whatever. But that's where I would differentiate, kind of the awakening aspect of practice is just from kind of the mature meditator aspect of it.
Right. So practice, would you say that practice might start with faith or confidence or trying it out, but actually fundamentally it's empirical?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on the person. I was really lucky, where I had those psychedelic experiences where I kind of experienced a lot of, what you could, I guess, call the fruition of practice, kind of real momentarily and temporarily, kind of like on a sneak peek basis.
Yeah, me too.
And then I wanted to know.
Yeah.
So then I got into Zen because I had already had the experiences.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say any of those were awakening, but they all showed me that there was something more going on.
Yeah.
Right? And so I didn't really need any faith, and there, I think there was enough intuitive sense of awakening existed that I didn't really need faith, right? And so so I was lucky, and I always wonder, people who get into practice without that, like, man, how does that work?
Well, they've got confidence, faith. They've got. Well, they also have suffering chasing them.
Yeah. And actually, and as I've said that, I'm thinking back to, I've done about, 50 interviews now. I think I have like 45 of them up, on my podcast where I interview Zen teachers and senior practitioners and stuff. And one thing I've noticed, I would say probably like 80 to 90% of people, I'm kind of answering my own question from earlier, kind of what really got them, kind of hooked them into practice was seeing a teacher or a senior practitioner kind of in action. It wasn't anything they said or even did. It was just the way they inhabited reality.
Yeah, that's true.
I want what that guy has.
That's right.
And I mean, how about with you and Suzuki Roshi? Was there anything about his bearing and his manner where you just like, what, I want what that guy has,
Well, I can say that is like one of the most common things for me to hear from students of his. Mm-hmm. But did I think that?
But you had the psychedelic experiences too,
I had this,
right?
I didn't really have any. I was sort of like you. I didn't really have any doubt. I also was raised on a sort of big mind type teaching. Right. There just wasn't that big a gap. You know what I mean? Where I was overwhelmed in his presence.
Right. But would you say he was evidence that the practice?
Yeah, I'd say he was unusual evidence of it. But also, I've met so many, known so many teachers and practitioners and holy men and stuff. It's not always obvious at all. It depends. Yeah. I'd say that was one of his great powers, was emanating vibes that people would just look at him. First time, people who were skeptical, but and go, wow, I want what he has, or it was more I want what he has than I worship him. Now, totally. This Dhanavananda, Da Frijan, Franklin Jones, you know who that is?
No.
I think that happened the last time. That's amazing. uh, he had that quality, and he was, he had good. I think he had good teaching, and his people are all good. They don't have a harmful thing like the Moonies. But read the thing I put on Cuke.com called A Taste of Persimmon. It's 3 days I spent there, and there's a lot of old Zinnies and people there. And I knew people that absolutely had no interest in him, just thought he was a con man, and he just walked by them and they became his disciple. He had something amazing.
That's ringing a bell. I think I maybe have read that on your site. That's ringing a bell somehow.
Things are rather hidden. I mean, I don't know how you find them. The way I can find everything is just by searching in the site search box.
I've lost hundreds of hours on your website going down rabbit holes.
Well, that's something. Oh gosh.
Even like I hope he doesn't hear this because he'd kind of roll his eyes at this. But even my ordination teacher, John Shoji Sorensen. So we met for lunch when I figured out, I wanted to get ordained and found out there was a priest near me. And so we met for lunch. And I remember there was one point he said something to me and he like leaned forward and he kind of looked at me in my eyes and like time just kind of stopped, and I just knew like there's just some energy there. I'm sounding really woo woo here, but I don't know, just like, I just knew like, this is my teacher, this is the guy this is the guy I need to study with him.
Yeah.
And, and it was just something about it was so like, I think without that moment, I could easily have left that meeting and thought like, oh, he's a cool guy, hope to see him again or something, you know what I mean? But like, but yeah, just like there was so it wasn't anything we said to each other, but there was just like a moment of, I don't know, recognition or I don't know, but like I can trace my discipleship to him like that, to that moment. That second. It was really weird.
Yeah, that's interesting. There were people who had the what I call nice man reaction to Suzuki. I would hear that.
Yeah.
Not a lot, very small percentage, but you had almost everybody that would express that by saying, yeah, well, I think he was a nice man. And Japanese priests tended to think we were just, didn't realize he was just another country priest and he wasn't really qualified to be called a Roshi until, maybe toward the end of his life.
And it really kind of points to the difference between charisma and presence, right? Presence is quiet. If you're just rushing through the room, you may not notice how somebody handles a teacup. Like I've heard a lot of people, like I can't remember who said this, but one person says, and then she handed me a teacup. In the way she handed me the teacup, that's when I decided to be a Zen
right,
student.
exactly.
Like that's not charisma. Like a lot of like spiritual charlatans, they'll have charisma and they'll draw people in. And
Trump,
like it's dramatic, right? Like that's spiritual charisma, or even just charisma.
Trump has charisma.
Whereas that quiet dignity, like just I think I really think it just comes back to like someone who's present, right? So much like we're rarely present. The people around us are rarely present. So when you're around someone who's present, that stands out. And I think that's what I think captures a lot of Zen students.
Yeah.
They sense that like, oh, okay. Like this is possible,
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Oh, if I could backtrack a little bit, there's one more point I wanted to make about the science of Zen stuff.
Yeah.
So a big mystery for me, like all through my practice, is I've kind of vacillated between where there'd be periods where I would do more of like a deeply focused attention type of network, like program. Like meditation approach, kind of like real samadhi, kind of jhana producing, you feel real strong sense of oneness and kind of joyful emotions and all that kind of stuff, right? And there's other times, the majority of times I've done more of a kind of like what you could, shikantaza or open awareness or objectless meditation. And I've always, and like a lot of Zen students at first, I think, well, am I wasting my time? Am I doing this right? And it's really interesting. I won't go into the details, but if you look at the research, and some of this I've had to kind of draw some of the lines myself, but the focused awareness meditation, it's much more likely to produce kind of joy type of emotions and
ecstatic.
Yeah, ecstatic, or even just you get to like the quote unquote seasoned meditator stage faster. It makes those brain circuits kind of change a little bit faster, right? Whereas I'll call open meditation, objectless meditation, or just present, just pure present moment awareness. It takes longer to get to that stage. It's less muscular in its way. It's kind of transforming your awareness. But here's the kicker: is Dogen always said, practices verification or practices enlightenment. And I actually think there's a little bit of neurological support for this, and here's why. Going back to what I was saying earlier, that there's various types of selves, right? The experience of being a self, in the experience of a narrative self, where there's a past and the present, and you have a narrative story of what you need from the future, and you don't get that, so you suffer, so forth. Like that type of self is highly dependent, and I could, in another context, I could go into a lot of detail behind the neurobiology behind this, but it's highly dependent on memory, right? The connection between the default mode network and the memory centers of the brain, the hippocampus and the parahippocampus and stuff. Like that's if there's no memory, there's no past, there's no you, so there's really no future, right? And so, so there's kind of no narrative self there. Here's what's really interesting about open awareness. What happens with open awareness that does not happen with focused attention meditation, and that's even for a beginner. When you drop into open awareness, the memory parts of the brain very quickly decouple from the selfing part of the brain, and so
the what decouple from
the self part, the memory part decouples from the selfing part.
Selfing, SELF?
A selfing, the self-referential.
Yeah, okay. I just wanted to make sure.
The narrative self part of the brain, right? Selfing, I think I invented a word there.
Yeah, I like
it. And so you're if awakening is, the transcendence of the narrative self, right? I think you're getting a little taste of it with open awareness, because you're actually decoupling the memory from your present experience. So you're naturally more in an open, receptive, in my mind, awake state. And so I really feel like it gives I find that fascinating to see, because it kind of matched my experience. Was, when I went through practice phases where I was really kind of going for the deep focus meditation, I'd get in all these joyful kind of jhana states, but it didn't really seem to move the needle in my daily life that much. I'd be like, during sesshin, I'd be all joyful, but then I'd get back to the world, and then that would all kind of fall apart, right? but when I would go through practices where I'm really just trying to be present, and it's more of like a surrender, that I felt like that was kind of awakening in motion, almost from the beginning. So some of it I kind of noticed in retrospect. And so it kind of explained to me the different textures of practice that I had through different kind of approaches I took through time, and I really think it kind of validates the, practice is awakening perspective. I think there's some neurological basis for it there.
Wow.
Does that make sense at all?
Yeah. You've said a lot of things and opened up ways of looking at it I won't forget. I find it very interesting.
Yeah, that kind of begs the question: what's the utility of all this, right? I've spent many thousands of hours researching. Like, is it like does anything good come from this? What's the point of knowing this
Well,
stuff?
in science, you can't lead with that.
Well,
you
but I think there's some
lead
practical,
with let's look into this. You have the urge to look into it. That is much more likely to be wisdom than saying, well, what's the use of it? That brings you down. That's the default mode, I'd say. Just following your urge, like Joseph Campbell, follow your bliss. Emerson, hit your wagon to a start. I think that's what you're doing, and I think it's beneficial. It's good. Well, it's good. It's good for you to do it so that I can hear about it, because I wasn't going to read all that stuff. So you did it for me and gave me at least a very enjoyable glimpse of it all. Yeah.
I don't disagree with anything you said, but to add to that, I think there is a little bit of utility. I think for like a seasoned meditator who already is devoted to practice, there's maybe not a whole lot there. But what I found and what people have reached out to me have told me is like people who are kind of just getting into practice, who are kind of maybe they've heard some scandals, some of the teachers. Well, if all these teachers are having scandals, is this even worth it? What people have reported to me is that when I was able to kind of lay out the kind of quantifiable evidence that there's actually some purpose to practice, and this is the mechanism of it. They've told me that's really motivating to them.
That's good.
Right, and so I think that's the biggest maybe basis.
Yeah,
for this.
That's good.
And then also I think it's fun. I enjoy learning.
Yeah,
this
there
stuff,
you go.
So there's some utility, but also I mentioned the whole focus meditation versus open meditation, and no matter what any of my teachers said, I always had some doubt whether I was spending my time right with the kind of open awareness. But seeing the even though it quote unquote had worked for me, it's still like, well, am I leaving money on the table here? Is this the best use of my time? But seeing that, oh, well, this is the neurological basis of the open awareness, practice is awakening. That kind of erased any doubt I had of it, I really have deep confidence in that approach to practice now.
Yeah. Well, that's good to hear. Also, that's good for me to hear. Yeah.
And one last thing I would say is, I've had some people say, this is materialist. It talks about gaining. In practice there is no gain. Like what I'd say to that is, first, from the materialist perspective, again, this is not a complete map of the human experience. Awareness itself, consciousness, sapience, scientists have no idea where that's coming from. And intuitively, I don't think they'll ever.
Right.
I think it's an inherent part of the universe, right? Yeah. But, so there's, and plus I've had, frankly, supernatural experiences that cannot be explained by any of this.
Yeah, me too.
Not that those really matter. Not that those things really matter from a practice perspective, but clearly there's something else going on, beyond just, neurological processing the reality. But also I'd say, from the gain perspective, people say, you're talking about gain, you're talking about, fruition, but practice is getting away from that. But what I would say, you got to divorce what's happening under the hood from our subjective experience of the situation, right? So as you practice, there is something gaining, from a certain perspective. your brain is changing. Your brain is rewiring. You are spending more time in the present moment. You are spending less time ruminating. You're quantifiably able to handle pain better. You're quantifiably able to bounce back from pain to a neutral state. These are all provable, quantifiable things. But from a subjective experience, the opposite is happening. You're losing things. You're losing self-referential thinking. You're losing drama, right? Things are simplifying, and you truly are not gaining anything. So I think it's important to make that distinction between those two perspectives.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, what you said about drama then, that I just thought, when people ask me, or if something comes up about my wife and me, I say,
Mm-hmm.
oh yeah, I love it. It's very low drama. That might be the first
Okay.
thing I say,
Yeah.
and that's nice. As you get older, I think it's easier. Hey, you said I said, come visit, and you said not going to happen. But what?
It just,
You're not. I mean, actually, I don't want to go anywhere, but I'm a lot older than you. I don't want to go anywhere. Maybe Singapore. It'd be sort of fun because it's so modern and everything.
It's just a life situation of young kids and
full-time
job.
And
overwhelming responsibilities. Doing exempt stuff. I mean, it's just it's hard to get away for a 7-day session, let alone trip. Country.
Yeah. To me, I look at it, I just say too expensive. And I don't want to drive. I don't want to be in cars going along. I haven't had to drive 9 years.
It's weird. The older I get, the more I dislike travel. I mean, there's just so much. I live in the cusp of the Sierra Nevada mountains, and of course it's all burning down, but at least for the time being, there's more within a 2-hour drive of me than I could ever experience in a lifetime.
There you go.
I don't see a huge need to travel 1,000 miles.
Right. What I found is every few months I really want to get away from here. I think it'll be good for me. But that's going, we just did. We just went to Ahmed for 3 nights where you can just, snorkel right off the beach. Not great snorkeling, but nice. That's a good 3.5 hours away. That's about as far as I want to go.
Right.
And that's
right. But
yeah.
But you literally are living in paradise, right?
No, you are. I don't. I don't.
But by the average society.
Yeah. By the
cheap
the hype. The hype is
tropical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And to me, the paradise here. Well, the paradise here is the people.
Mm-hmm. Is there a lot of social inequality there?
Is there a lot of what?
Social inequality?
Well, it's got a caste system, but actually not like India. Not like India. You'll have...
How about America, where, there's,
90%
of the wealth is in 2% of the hands?
Well, they've got that too here. But not as bad as America. They have some... My wife's in a social service organization, and she gets to very poor villages, and they're just bringing them dental care and access to some doctors and stuff, and there's it's still a small island. If you look at all of Indonesia, there's much bigger problems Indonesia-wide. But really the greatest problem is one that we won't take back, is progress. Because that's destroying us. And we can't stop it. I just posted, I have this cute nonsense blog, and I hardly post on it these days because I'm trying to concentrate on finishing a book, Tassara stories. But I just posted today, America now is recycling 5% of its plastic. And the article was, plastic recycling is a myth. And then I put in, I think all the hopeful stuff is a myth.
So, I know we need to tie up here, but is Tassa Horror Stories, is that going to be purely an audiobook, or is that going to be
No.
a regular book too?
Yeah. It will be an
You have
audio
a
book.
publisher for that
Huh?
yet? Yeah. You have a publisher for that yet?
Well, I wrote Sam Burkholz about it. I don't know how long ago, about 8 years ago. And so he immediately connected me to an editor at Shambhala. And,
Oh, great.
since then I've had a lot to do with Shambhala, but I've just worked on it just little bits now and then. But I've already got 100 pieces written. What I'm going to try to do now is put it together. And I don't know exactly what's going to happen or if it'll be any good. I've already read all the pieces into podcasts. We'll see. I'm never confident about what I'm working on when I'm working on it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, not to be ask us or anything, but I've loved everything you've done. So,
Well,
Thank You Okay and Crooked Cucumber are both just amazing books. I just love them.
thank you. Well, I had a lot of help, and they took. That was 9 years straight working on those two. And what I always said when I started doing Toss Our Stories 8 years ago, I said, this is not going to be like that. I'm just going to do something quick. It doesn't have to be good. There's a few stories I want to tell. But
is it a narrative that goes through the whole book, or is it a bunch of vignettes?
It's both.
What's the structure of it?
To tie it together, like say thank you and okay, a lot of work. And but I don't know what'll happen. What I'm trying to do now is simplify everything and just work with it. But I've been saying that incidentally for several years. But I really think I'm close. Katrinka's going to America in a week for 6 weeks.
Cool.
And that really opens a lot more time up for me. I don't watch anything on any shows or anything.
I'm not going to email you. I don't want to distract you when you finish this.
My emails. I'm not doing blog posts. I'm only doing one podcast a week. That's with a guest. The emails can take hours for me, and I have to respond to them. Different things. People ask me to do things. I think I have to go offline and go hide. I don't know what else would work.
There you go.
But we'll see. The other thing is, once I get into it, and it's already all there, then that if I get into it, it'll take over, and other things will suffer automatically.
Cool.
Yeah.
Turn off that default mode.
What? Which is the default mode? I'll get off the default mode and into that, and that'll be what is occupying my thinking. I had to stop music. I already stopped music because that will occupy my mind, and because I produce songs, and then I'm always disturbed by how, this isn't good enough. We got to do this and that. And when it's finished, it's all right. I like it. But I can't have that. So I'm not thinking about it. I'm trying to reduce the things that occupy my default mode. Right, definitely.
Right.
Yeah. Well, you've given me a whole new way to look at all of this. And I enjoy it. I think it's good. And like you say, I think it's helpful. And I like what you said about that, about so many people, we all know the all this bad gossip, and I tend to be guilty of that. I don't like to do harmful gossip that puts an individual down, but I like to, I like to show it's just everyday life with lots of problems, and there a guy in China just got hold of me, wants to do a Zoom with his class, and he's doing a whole thing on utopian writing. And he said, thank you, Gary is a rare exception to utopian writing about Zen. And he talks about D.T. Suzuki and other people, how they present it, life in a monastery, and also the history. I haven't read him saying anything. I've just started reading what he sent me. The history of Buddhism tends to be, idealistic and just sort of best case scenario, But the point of the koans, which make it look like, oh, God, yeah, I'll just hear a stone hitting bamboo and then I'll wake up and that'll be it forever. The point of the koans isn't really to tell you historical truth. It's to give you something to work with in your practice,
right? Right. Absolutely.
And there was all this writing and all this stuff in America that we looked at as if this is historical truth. I'm going to get into that, and these things will happen to me, and then I'll have no problems, right? But I enjoy the muck, nothing discourages me. Suzuki didn't want to discourage anybody. But, that was early on, he thought it was all fragile. He didn't want any bad stories about being in a monastery in Japan, being told by people he'd sent over there. He said it would discourage people. Well, I think that time has passed, anyway. And I think what you're talking about is more important is the approach, or maybe they should go hand in hand. One is to be realistic, get out of this fairy tale idea of what practice and Zen is. But the other thing is show people that there's good evidence and that it is worthwhile. I think there is, like you said, utility in it, but there's great value, ultimate value, I'd say, in it. Incomparable value. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.
And keep up the good work. All right. Bye-bye.
Sorry, I cut you off.
So thanks a lot, Barry. That's very neat. I really enjoyed it. Oh, I want to say something about our goodbyes there. For some reason the sound started going out. His voice started breaking up. So and then when I stopped recording, and it came back. Actually, we both recorded. He did it as a backup, but I didn't need it. Every once in a while, I lose one, but then it came back and we talked some more without recording it, which was fine. There was enough here. Anyway, thanks a lot, Barry Crawford. Very interesting. I've been thinking, what I've been thinking about is, all right, the default network or the default mode in our brain or whatever. That seems to me, thinking about the future, thinking about the past, planning this and that. And I talked about sexual desire. And let's talk about impulses. And impulses, well, there's sexual desire, which seems to me to be stronger than other desires that are not really necessary, to keep living. Like if we're cut off from air, of course, that would be a very strong desire. And not the sort of desire we need to get rid of. Same with water, same with food, But sexual desire is very interesting. And to me, it's just obvious. It's there to keep the species going. It's what an advantage, you know. You got all these males running around just waiting to have sex as much as they can. But that's, of course, checked by social, cultural imperatives. And I should say, women also have sexual desire, but it seems to be, in general, of a different nature. But I don't know. I just know vaguely about these things. I haven't studied them, and I don't care to. I mainly just don't want to get out of bounds with them. Okay? Anyway, it seems to me that the impulses, desire, that can't be the same as the sort of thinking about the future, thinking about the past, the sort of running monologue that tends to happen with this. But I'm going to talk to him about that more. And maybe I'll get back and report to you. Okay. This has been a Cuke Audio podcast. I'm DC, Poobah of Cuke Audio and Cuke Archives, coming to you from sleepy Sonora with Dogget Bandita, Feline Cuchita, and dear lovely Katrinka. And we're wishing you and yours and all of us a grand awakening.